Let's get it rolling. Let's make this happen. Okay, good. So here's what we need to know. Basically, something very dramatic, some would say horrific, is about to happen. And I'm just going to get right to the point of it because, that's kind of how I like to do my videos. So there was a filing, and the filing basically processed originally from this case. And the case, and there's actually multiple that were then joined together to some degree, but it's 5 states in total. This in particular one was 26-CV-172 AS, and that was the specific order. Let me give you a quick walkthrough as to some of the details. I'm going to read directly from the actual case brief so you know what's going on. It was State of New York versus the Administration for Children and Families et al. Defendants. Here we go. So on January 8th of 2026, plaintiffs filed an emergency motion. Plaintiffs are like, states at this point. Motion for temporary restraining order seeking to preserve the status quo pending the resolution of their forthcoming motion for a preliminary injunction. Put another way, Trump wants to stop paying welfare benefits to states that have fraud that aren't willing to clean it up or hand over the data that essentially they've been using and doing. And so let me just summarize it. The Democrat states have been managing fraud, not in the good way. In some of these states, it looks like the hundreds of millions. Some of these states, it's the millions. Some of these states, the billions. And they've been using this money that was meant for welfare recipients to basically hyperfund political agendas, putting money into other countries, funding crime rings, etc. So the Democratic Party is like, they got a problem. And the problem is they got caught. And they got caught in such a way that basically now they're saying there's no way we're going to hand over our data as to how we release information to the federal government, as to how we spend the federal government's welfare funds. They're like, we'll just do these little batches, but we're not going to give you the full thing. So the thing with that is, the problem with that whole situation is, and it's pretty simple and straightforward, the federal government cannot trust the states in these Democrat-oriented places to actually distribute funds to them in the future, right? So there's California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York. And it's going to grow. They're going to have Maine on there very likely soon, along with many other states. So it's going to grow. So the point is, now they've uncovered, because of this Nick Shirley kid, 23-year-old YouTuber, that basically welfare was being used to fund all these nefarious things, including election stuff. So as a result of that, the Democrat leaders from these different states are doing whatever they can to go ahead and basically stop legally the federal government from getting access to this information. And they're demanding the funds, the welfare checks for these programs, the temporary assistance for needy families, the Child Care and Development Fund, the CCDF, and the Social Services Block Grant, SSBG funds. What they're saying is, just to be totally clear, they're saying at the end of the day, hey, we, the federal government, Trump's side, don't want to pay for more fraud to continue. So states, you have to show us your data going way back, not just like, the past year. They've got to show their data going way back. And what it's likely to show, and we don't know exactly to what point, but it's likely to show that the Democrats have been managing fraud in the billions to almost potentially trillions of dollars level, throughout all these different states for welfare-based programs where the money didn't get to the people. Now, who are the people that the money didn't get to? Well, that would be your elderly. That would be your disabled. That would be your children. That would be certain minority groups. That would be basically the most, fragile classes of human beings that we have, right? Young parents. It's another one. You saw that with Minnesota. So what's happening is the Democratic Party has a problem. The problem is that the party is basically, for them to be able to get cash from the middle class through the federal government, that system, that party is over. Because now, systematically, Trump will go ahead and withhold these welfare benefits from each state unless they're willing to hand over the data. Now, the Republican states are already, for the most part, handing over all of their data. And don't think the Republican states haven't had a lot of fraud in there as well. There have been hundreds of thousands, again, hundreds of thousands of people who were on voter rolls and benefit rolls that were not supposed to. So when people say there's not really much fraud, they're lying. There is a significant, massive amount of fraud. To me, $1 million worth of fraud, that's pretty bad, right? But that's not really massive. That's not really all over the place. Then you get to the category of 100 million, that's massive fraud. That's really bad. That's like there was a ring, highly evolved corporate existence, basically multiple corporations and communities working together to create a gang, sort of like, crime ring situation. Then you get to the $1 billion level where there's billions of dollars. And that's where you get into political assistance, actual political parties creating these situations to lie on behalf of these criminal enterprises. That's when you get into that level. This might actually turn into the largest fraud ring that's ever been uncovered in the history of America, maybe even the human race. So as a result of that, it's getting fired up. Now, if you watch CNN and MSNBC, then it's all about ICE and how dare they. If you watch Fox News, it's all about ICE being great and these minority groups, Somalians, Nigerians, Armenians, being, terrible, terrible groups, yada, yada. Let me just tell you the thing you should be focusing on. You should be focusing on how much money they stole from you, okay? These benefits were paid for by the middle class, which most of you are. And they were paid to the federal government and then distributed to the state government to help the poor, disabled, elderly, young parents, etc. Now, the reason why, before I go into this specific case order reading, I just want you to understand it. The reason why this is such a big deal is that, unfortunately, the states, through the pool rules that the federal government put in place for distributing these funds, the states were allowed to pick who essentially was going to be audited. And each state, 500 to 1,000 cases would be audited, around 50,000 total for the year, would then go up to the feds. The feds would review a quarter to half of them, and then basically establish a penalty for how many people receive these benefits that they weren't supposed to. So we now know that the states could hide actual fraud, allowing a fraud ring to grow at the billions of dollar level. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, how much is Trump withholding just from these 5 states? Well, they've calculated it out to around 10.26 billion. Basically, for the temporary assistance for needy families, 7.19 billion, CCDF, 2.2 billion, SSBG, 870 million, totaling around 10.26 billion. Although it might be a little higher than that. You know how that stuff always goes. So the point that I'm getting at with this situation is that as of tomorrow, people who are supposed to receive TANF, CCDF, SSBG in those 5 states, California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York, these 5 states, as of tomorrow, at the end of the day, the temporary restraining order will have run out. Okay, so basically the 6th is the final day where Trump is required to go ahead and pay out certain funds. But as of the 6th ending, right, the end of the day of when they would be in, at the federal office, participating in the payment systems to pay out the benefits, at the end of the day when they stop that, at that point, tomorrow, those benefits will de facto no longer pay out. And I've been watching it on the specific case situation where you have state of New York, state of California, state of Colorado, state of Illinois, and state of Minnesota. And I've been watching them go through the process with this thing. There is not currently that I could find an updated 14-day additional time. But remember, they've already done a temporary restraining order on two occasions. That means when this was originally filed, they did a TRO that said, no, Trump, you still got to pay it out during January. Then it comes to January and a little bit of February up to February 6th. That was the second TRO, temporary restraining order. Will there be a third? We don't know. We don't know. But at this point, they're at the second one. Will they do a third? Potentially. But at some point, the judge is going to say, wait a minute. Now, real quick, Diana, thank you for the $10 donation. That's absolutely amazing. I will get the doggies more treats. They've been loving them up and doing very well. We also got a donation from, real quick, Curie3938. Super appreciate it. Both of them are members. Let me put a big heart there. It says say my it says say my name, baby. There you go. Curie 3938. All right, there you go. Now, before I go into the next part, which is specifically reading the case law related to what's going on, well, it's not technically, it's case proceedings, right? It's jurisdictional documentation as opposed to law. They're going through the process of it, although there's law obviously in it. Before I go into that, please remember, I don't do Medicare stuff, okay? That's just not my jam. I am America's most viewed, subscribed to, and clicked on Social Security Disability Attorney. So if you're trying to get SSI, SSDI, that kind of stuff, and you have questions or you want representation, I'm the one you call. But for Medicare stuff, so here's the deal. Chapter over here, hundreds of people have already called in and gotten their Medicare assistance, right? Where they were able to answer questions for them and help them through Chapter, just through this channel alone. So if you get a chance to go ahead and you want to do, a call to find out more, learn about Medicare, that's the place right there, 339-226-6287. All right. Now, with that said, I want to go through something real quick. All right. So let's read through it. For reasons stated in plaintiff's motion, the court finds that good cause has been shown for the issuance of a temporary restraining order under Federal Rules of Civil Procedure 65B and a stay under 5 U.S.C. Section 705. The court grants plaintiff's motion and orders the following relief. Defendants are directed. Defendants in this case are going to be Trump's administration, the Administration for Children and Families. Okay. Defendants are, the Trump administration is required to. Okay, defendants are directed to restrain and stayed from implementing the ACF funding freeze, right, withholding the funds from being paid out, as applied to the Child Care Development Fund, right, temporary assistance for needy families, and social services block grants. So they got to pay all these welfare benefits up and through a certain date and time. This includes the entirety of the letter sent to plaintiffs on January 5th and 6th, and part 2 of this, directed to immediately remove any restrictions outside of permitted statutory authority on plaintiff's ability to draw down funds under the Child Care Development Fund, temporary assistance to needy families, and social services block grants. Okay, so basically, just to real quick summarize that one, directed to immediately remove any restrictions outside of permitted statutory authority. So in other words, they're not allowed to stop payment and they're not allowed to restrict the payments. And now through these temporary restraining orders up till the February 6th deadline. But later in the day of February 6th, right, after all the federal offices have closed at that point, February 6th at the end of the day, February 7th going forward, you guessed it, those benefits will not be paid out. Now, I want to show you something real quick just to kind of go through some basics here so you can understand it. A lot of people don't really, they hear this stuff and they go, oh, how can this be real? How can this be real? Yada, yada, yada. Well, let's go through that real quick. So February 6, 2026 is the date that the extended expiration of temporary restraining order is basically issued by the U.S. District Court of the Southern District of New York. What happened is they said, okay, we're going to do one temporary restraining order. Then, okay, well, we got to do another one. Another one was issued. Now they're at the second one. Tomorrow's the official deadline. So in this case, the New York State et al. V. Administration of Children and Families et al. Case number, it's important, 126 CV 00172. Again, if you want to look it up, it's case number 126 CV 00172. All right, the first TRO was granted on January 9th of 2026. Okay, so, they're moving pretty quick with this thing, just so you understand. It was Judge Arun Subramanian, okay? And that basically blocked the Trump administration from not paying out these funds and not restricting these funds, okay? So the court canceled the freeze for a certain amount of time using that TRO, right? So it's a temporary restraining order, okay? And so basically what happened was it was extended, and then essentially, we did the second one, and now we got to the point where the court has to rule on this again. They haven't, though, which is weird because, you would think they're going to do something. And, you can see the parties are doing movements. They're sending submissions. They're sending requests. They're submitting motions, etc. But what's happening in this particular case is that Trump is actually probably going to get his way to some degree. Let me explain. Trump has a tendency to have a big bark, right? I'm going to go and buy this entire country. And then he goes to the negotiation table and they say, okay, well, we're going to let you do whatever you want up there. You just can't have it, right? You just can't have the whole country. And then Trump goes away happy because that's what he's actually wanted. That was the thing he wanted. That's the thing he wanted to do. So the bottom line is this: there is not a third extension under the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure under 65B2 for good cause at this point. I don't know if they will go ahead and extend it, but I want to go ahead and go through some basics so that you understand what Trump is demanding specifically of these groups when it comes to essentially turning the benefits back on. Now, remember, if they don't pay out the benefits, right, the temporary assistance for needy families, right, and all these different things, if they don't pay out these benefits, these block grants, stuff like that, then what will happen is people are going to have a really shitty February that are impoverished, that are elderly, that are disabled, that are young parents, etc. So what's happening is basically this, okay, just to go through some of the basic things. So Trump is at this point where he has announced by and through different federal agencies that he is looking for specific requirements for things to actually occur. Hold on, I'm just getting a ring notification. I just want to see what's going on. Now everything's cool. All right, so what do you need to know? Trump is basically saying you will states, right? So which states? California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York. You will give me this, or else your disabled, elderly, your young parents, your children will not get these federal payments. Now, the weird thing is these states have not released a lot of information about how they are ramping up to help these families. Normally, you'd expect these states, California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, New York, they're hyper blues. You know what I mean? They're super blues. They're woke states, you know? Normally, you would expect these states to go ahead and basically create a situation where they would go ahead and set food banks up and special food stamp situation and, you know, get their state-based militia, military, whatever groups to go out and try and help people that need additional help. I mean, a super, you know, military style wheels on meals kind of gig. But we're not seeing that with these states, which is very interesting. Now, just to be clear, I used to believe, and I was an idiot for doing so, but it is what it is. I used to believe the Democratic Party, I'm still laughing at Curie, who basically did the $10 donation and said, "Say my name, baby." I'm still laughing about that one. So the thing is, just to kind of clarify like where things are at. Oh, and please remember to like and subscribe the video. Please, you know, so many of you don't like and subscribe, and it makes me so sad. So what's happened is this: the Democrats, I used to think, and I was an idiot about this, and I'll admit it, they used to be like the core program for supporting minorities, for supporting the disabled, for supporting the elderly, for supporting young children. That's like what their core was. It's not anymore. Their new thing is immigrants, 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 Middle East, right? That's their new hyper, you know, fixation. Have they been reporting on the almost $100,000 deaths in Iran? No. Have they been reporting on the Turkish issues? Have they been reporting on the Afghanistan issues? Have they been? No. So at this point, I think it's fair to say that it's not, the Democratic Party is not so much the party of the African American community, the Jewish community, the, you know, Ashkenazi community. It's not really that party anymore. It is now the party of immigrants and the party of the LGBTQ plus, and I would say the Middle East. Those are their core functions, and it makes more sense if you understand that they just shifted. They pivoted away from, you know, like the black vote and the Jewish vote. They pivoted away from that. Right? That wasn't their main direction, their main thing. You know, they did some stuff and they tried to push some angles, but they couldn't connect anymore. They couldn't make it happen like they used to. And I got to be honest, I think their main voting population, which are white females, have really done an amazing job to uphold the Democratic Party. It is interesting because, you know, we want people to be taken care of. We want to have innovative ideas. That tends to be the Democratic Party. New ideas, new inventions. However, it is interesting to see individuals that are afraid of, you know, people robbing them and attacking them and potentially doing horrible things to their bodies in the middle of the night when they're walking home from work. It is always interesting to watch those people vote for laws that put more criminals on the streets that are violent criminals. So I've never really understood that. I don't understand why those individuals who are poor vote for people who will make them more poor. I've never understood why those people who are more fragile when it comes to being targeted or attacked vote for people that make it so that criminals are more available to do those crimes. I've never really understood that. But again, it's not for me to understand. It's just for, you know, whatever to happen, it happens. You know what I mean? So what I've now learned is that with the Democratic Party, right, they were willing to steal money from the elderly, the children, the disabled, young parents, right, and communities, including minority communities, right, that couldn't get access to this stuff because they were giving it to other people. So as a result of that, when I started to like shift my understanding of like how this works, and I'm like, okay, well, it's not so much the party for the disabled or the elderly now, it's the party that was actually ripping them off and frauding those people. And when I got that down, when I understood it, and I was like, okay, now it makes more sense to me, I felt a lot better because it made more sense as to why the Republicans were starting to learn so much about the Social Security Administration. As the Democrats started to move out of the territory of Social Security and being like the party of Social Security, the party of socialism, the Republican Party started to fill that gap and really be interested in Social Security and Social Security numbers and all of those things that matter in that field. And, now it makes more sense to me why there was a vacuum effect and the Republicans ended up flowing into what I consider to be my field. In my field, I've always considered to be a very Democrat-oriented field, Social Security, socialism. I'll be the first one to say I like a 90% capitalism, 10% socialism, right? Capitalism isn't perfect. If it was, we wouldn't need socialism, but capitalism isn't perfect. So we need a little socialism. We need retirement. We need disability benefits, right? We need these things to keep the impoverished from going into a hyper impoverished state. We just do. Okay. It is what it is. So this is what Trump wants. This is what Trump is demanding essentially from these Democrat-oriented states. So the first thing is submission of justification and receipt documentation. Okay, so basically he's calling it the defend the spend requirements, right? Before any of these monies, these federal payments can be released, drawn on, taken out, spent, there is a pre-approval spending process, standard procedures going forward that he wants to use. Okay, so think of it as like the Democratic states, the Republican states are officially being audited by the federal government. And the federal government is like, look, we caught you doing fraud. We caught you submitting data that wasn't showing the fraud. So now, in order for you to receive the funds, you have to do your due diligence, your paperwork. And to be fair, they're treating the states like they're felons because to some degree, I'm not sure these governors are outside of that definition of being a criminal felon, right? Because, somehow billions got spent. And sure, I mean, Tim Walz, he might not get it at the end of the day. He might not be put in a position where he faces, some sort of criminal action against him because he's a governor. You know what I mean? And a lot of these individuals that are high up, let's just be fair. There's a two-tier system, right? There's the one we all follow, and then there's the one that the Clintons follow. And, different, even the Trumps have gotten away from certain things because they haven't had, it goes both ways. So just the rich people, it's a different tier of justice, right? They're the ones at the top. They're the ones who control who gets prosecuted. They're the ones who control which judges go in. It's a two-tier system. Do I feel like it should be a one-tier system? Absolutely. Is it obvious and is there de facto proof that it's a two-tier system? Obviously. It's okay. We know now. We got it. It's okay. It is okay. All right. So here's the next thing. He wants provisions of that would require extensive documentation and data to be handed over related to the program, implementing it, releasing funds, using the funds, etc. Okay, so what do I mean by this? So he's saying he doesn't, and this is the thing that's really going to screw the Democrats on this. He doesn't just want recent data. He doesn't just want past couple of years. He wants the Biden administration. He wants the Trump administration and the first go around. He wants, going way back, which is interesting because this fraud was likely going on during the Trump administration. But, they didn't catch it because the states were in control of the audits when it came to sending the data to the feds. So the feds just couldn't figure it out. So let's talk about this documentation and data program implementation. So he wants years and years going back of historical records on TANF and SSBG service providers. He wants to know all of the different providers. He wants to know when the Somalian fraud first started and the Nigerian fraud started, the Armenian fraud started. He wants to know the origin story because if he has this data, you're going to see a lot of people in politics, obviously on the Democrat side, getting arrested. It's probably, like I said, and I don't think you guys understand what I'm really getting at here. Like I said, this is going to be likely the largest fraud that has ever been found on planet Earth by big government. It's going to be very big. People will actually study this in the future, like textbooks for kids learning about, business and what happened and fraud. This is probably going to become the number one landmark case study going forward. It's very interesting. And the whole time while it's going on, the Republicans are going, we need to know more info, give us the data. The Democrats are saying, we ain't giving you any data, and stop, being mean to our Somalians. Their businesses are going bankrupt. And some of you, I can understand, you want the Somalian businesses to succeed. I fully support your, ideology. Some of you want the Somalian businesses to go out of business. I fully support your ideology. Some of you want basically a system that's just in the distribution of money to go to the people who actually need it. I really super duper support that ideology, but let's keep rolling. So he wants years of historical records on temporary assistance for needy families and SSBG services. He wants child care attendance documentation. He wants he wants to verify participation and prevent overbilling fraud. He wants reports. He wants demands for privacy, personal identifiable information. He wants all kinds of stuff, names, social security numbers, and other details. He wants family members that were non-recipients that were potentially tied to immigration status verification, so that ICE can go and basically collect other individuals. What he's doing is he's cleaning house. Trump is essentially going to, in his capacity, be able to arrest politicians en masse like never before. The Democrats do not want this at all extreme measures. They will do whatever they can at all extreme measures to not be in a situation where this data gets handed over, because it's not going to be good for the Democrats. It's going to be really extremely bad. Now, he wants compliance demonstrations with federal requirements. He wants a review process. And then after which this occurs, he will go ahead and release the funds to these different states, specifically right now, California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York. Maine, very likely to be added soon. And as a result of that, this will then allow the impoverished to receive their benefits, which is ironic because there was so much money not going to the impoverished, not going to the disabled, not going to the retired. Like, you could basically cut a check. You could actually cut like a fraud surplus check just out of the states doing this, welfare-based fraud. Although it should obviously probably go to, you guessed it, those who need the welfare. So knowing all this, knowing what this means, how this all works, what I've kind of realized is that we are at a very interesting point in this entire situation. Now, tomorrow, it is potential likelihood, we can't say for certain, I can't promise it, that the court will rule another temporary restraining order and make Trump pay out. But I don't think that the judge is going to be able to continue to do this beyond February. I think that by the time we get to March, the judge will kind of, be like, okay, well, we need to figure out what's going to happen here. In my opinion, when crime rings get caught and an audit is coming, they usually have the FBI go and collect data immediately. But seeing how the states are controlling a lot of the data that they have and trying to restrict access to it, kind of like the Georgia election thing and all that stuff, what it appears like to the American people, and I'm not saying it appears like this to you, but I've seen as a generality of people looking at this situation, it appears like to the American people that basically those who are in charge of the data should be willing to hand over the data as proof that they are good for their accounting. The reality is that we all know that the accounting is likely to show tens to potentially hundreds of billions of dollars of fraud. And the sad part about it, and this is what I say about the Democratic Party, which is why I think they need to get rid of all of their high-level managers, all of their governors, things like that, and bring in new people. What's sad is that the party used their reputation that they were for the impoverished, and I believed it too. I was totally for it. And then they manipulated the money that was supposed to go to the poor by allowing us to believe that they were the party that was for the elderly, for the disabled, for the young parents, etc. And I think that at the end of the day, what this is all going to come out as is, I think, once they finally do the audit, because remember, they're going to do the audit. They've caught the fraud. The fraud was due to the states withholding fraudulent information. So, you can't get around the intent part of this. Like, why didn't the states send to the federal government data that properly showed all of this fraud? And the simple suggestion and answer to that is because it was intentional to withhold data that would go to the federal government for the federal government to audit it. So I think any court with any, granted, remember there's a two-tier system when it comes to our jurisprudence, our adjudication situation. It does seem like we have judges who politically lean left and lean right. And it does seem like, the Democrats obviously pick a court with a justice it tends to look like, where the individual tends to lean left. But, then it goes to the Supreme Court where there's more right. And then the whole thing, which is always interesting. It looks like, district court goes one way, circuit court agrees, goes to the Supreme Court, and the entire thing gets overturned. So my opinion on this is that I think Trump will ultimately be successful in fully auditing the states. Now, when he audits the states and when he finds all of the fraud, what happens next? Before I go through what happens next, please remember to like and subscribe. Let's get into it real quick. It is my belief that when Trump goes through and audits the states and he finds a lot of this fraud, because remember, they're going to try and cook some books, create some stuff. They're going to have a Leering Center magical break-in. You know what I mean? Something like that is potentially, but probably going to occur somewhere in the mix of all of this, right? But when he does this and he finds massive amounts of fraud beyond what they've already found, what will happen at that point, just to be very clear, is that he will likely go ahead and federalize or ask the legislature to go ahead and begin the process to federalize welfare benefits. Now, what does that mean for people who are receiving these welfare benefits, right? Who are receiving the TANF, who are receiving the CCDF, the SSBG? What does it mean for them? It means that just like disability benefits, just like, federal VA benefits, just like all these other benefits, it is going to get harder to get money from the government, okay? It's going to be harder to go ahead and apply to receive it because of all the extra elemental requirements. It's going to be tougher to get money out of the federal government, even if it's, being distributed through the state. And why is this? Well, for one, the more people that are on TANF or CCDF or SSBG, the more of those people, they're not out there working to go ahead and earn the money to pay for the things that those programs are paying for. Now, me, a disability attorney, I'm a soft spot guy. I like to see people getting money when they can't truly work. Now, are there a lot of people on disability benefits who can work some but don't want to work a lot? Yeah. Are there a lot of people who can't work at all? Are there a lot of people who can't work over a certain amount? Absolutely, no doubt. I know this because I'm the other extreme. I work basically from around 8-ish, sometimes 7-something, until around 2-ish at night. And I got to tell you, after doing that for a decade plus, amount of time, you get really burnt out. You get really tired and you don't live a good life. Your standard of living is total shit. So I get it. I really do get it, Now, here's my point with all this, just to be very clear with this situation. If Trump goes and begins the process for federalizing benefits, the states will then lose control of distributing the benefits. And those benefits will then be distributed likely through the Social Security Administration, very similar to how they distribute supplemental security income. You'll file online. There will be automation with AI because of Frank Bisignano. And if you want to be approved, you'll have to go through a process. And the process will usually require certain groups to go ahead and go through vocational training and vocational achievement. They got to do certain jobs for a certain amount of time. They have to apply to so many jobs. Why? Well, the reason why is that you can look at the charts. The people are, food stamps and these other programs, it vastly went up. And we created a society of people who basically needed a helping hand. And the amount of the helping hand that they needed, well, that's what they're saying might not be as much as they actually claim that they need, right? They're probably getting benefits when they could go out and work. Here's the problem that everybody's going to run into and that Trump is going to run into. When AI comes out to the level where people are using it, okay? And remember, there's still a lot of people that are older that don't use it because of religious purposes, or they just don't want to get into it, or it's a privacy reason or whatever. And that's fine. But there will be pretty much no human being in the next 5 years that, is in a situation where they have to interact with society. I mean, if you're retired and you got your room and that's it, it is what it is. But there's pretty much not anybody within the next 5 years where if they're not using AI, they are not somebody who can really interact with society at a level that, is a certain standard. Because remember, AI basically gives you vast amounts of information immediately. It does heavy duty thinking, heavy duty calculations immediately. And so there's not going to be people, in a situation not using it. They're all going to be using it because it gives them that advantage, right? You want to make money, you want to make a sale, you want to do a job, you have to have that advantage. So at the end of the day, just to kind of be clear with this whole situation, I believe that Trump will go ahead and begin the federalization process of these benefits. And then once he does that, he will go ahead and release them through the SSA. And then once he does that, you'll have AI and robots coming out, and more Americans will lose their jobs. And then once these benefits are federalized, he will have control buying through the Republican Party to see who's going to get the benefit distribution, which means that a lot of the poor are kind of at the beck and will of Donald Trump and his administration, and then whoever's going to be president thereafter. So it is a very, very interesting situation. It is a very, very sticky situation. My belief, to summarize and finalize, is that America is going through a problem state. And I want to tell you this because this is probably the most important thing you could learn from this video about the future of America and these benefits. America had a massive advantage after World War II, right? A lot of our cities weren't destroyed. Obviously, there was, Pearl Harbor, stuff like that. But, the country for the most part was intact, right? Whereas Europe was totally all over the place. China hadn't developed yet. Russia was, spending too much, couldn't afford as much, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So in that World War, America came out as the clean country where they were able to rebuild and industrialize and kick butt and make lots of stuff relatively quickly and do an amazing job. Otherwise, very clearly, the innovators of the world were Germany. Germany had an entire culture, which my people got sucked into, the Ashkenazis, which are the German Jews, into being scientists to create all kinds of things that were vastly beyond all these other nations. Kind of like how China is now, where China has all these scientists and they're getting the best kids from the best universities to go ahead and lead the future of technology for those countries. That's why China is kind of innovating at an accelerated rate. China was also restricted from going to the International Space Station. Now they're creating a massive, much, much bigger one with much more power options and much more this and much more that. You will see America over the next 5 to 10 years losing the advantage. And that's mostly a cultural thing too. In America, a lot of people get paid a lot to not do as much compared to other nations, right? Where they get paid very little for vastly more work. And so what you have to keep in mind is that America, with this giant advantage, it is eroding so fast that people aren't going to be able to keep up. And the standard of living you have right now is almost de facto definitively greater than the standard of living you will have in 10, 15, 20 years because of the devaluation of the dollar. And, at the end of the day, if you look around America and you go, how excited are these people to work extra hours, late hours, push into the night? How many innovators and brilliant minds do we have? How many new, amazing innovative places, Silicon Valley, etc. Are these Americans likely to create the future? And the truth is, in almost every category, China kind of beats us, which is not good because while we do have a stronger military at the moment, they're going to basically out-innovate our military because our military to them is kind of like, how Russia is to us. They have a bunch of things that can take out a lot of our expensive toys, and we have a lot of things that can take out a lot of Russia's expensive toys. So at the end of the day, what's happening is the devaluation of your standard of living is pretty much imminent. I know people voted Trump in and they're like, definitively, he's going to make everything amazing and wonderful and blah, 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 blah. I get it. But it's not just a Trump thing. It's an international trade thing. And while he's negotiating a lot of these international trade objectives and he's getting much better percentages and using tariffs as a big stick, right? Even though he's doing that, it's not going to be enough. It's just not going to be enough. And that's because other nations are strong enough now to create their own monetary system, BRICS, against the G4 summit folks, the US petrodollar. And then they're going to use that to go ahead and push America out of the trading situation. And remember, your life is what it is, dictated not just by your actions. It's realistically more dictated by how many other countries are buying and using US dollars. And you got to remember, you're not really in control of that. The president has to do a lot of international agreements with that. And we're going to see which way the Supreme Court leans with that whole situation, because it's just a tough spot. If the Supreme Court says your tariffs are terrible, horrible, we're not allowing you to do this, then you will have a massive devaluation in, essentially your living style. If the Supreme Court is looking at, let Trump do his tariff thing, let him go ahead and rebuild the nation and make the nation the new version of America. And it shouldn't be any surprise to you that America has massively paid for the WHO, UN, all these programs, military bases in all these other countries. We are a massive military group, a massive military industrial, fighting force. We are, because we're all over the damn place. A lot of you don't realize this. Hold on, let me. I'll pull up the data real quick. How many USA military bases are outside of the continental states? Okay, let's see what we got here, or continental US. Okay, there are roughly between 750 to over 800 military bases outside the 50 states and Washington, D.C., spread across approximately 80 countries and territories, with significant concentrations in Germany, Japan, and South Korea. So, just to be fair with this thing, we are basically I don't know how you'd put it, but I don't know the best way to put it, but we're like, I'm not even, we're the super soldiers of the world. We are, I don't know. We're like, we are the new world order. Like, if you ever sat back and you're like, I wonder what the new world, we are the new world order. We are military bases in all these different countries, and we protect all these other countries. But that's why they have to use the US dollar, because if they don't use the US dollar, then we won't protect them. That's the gig. If they don't buy our petrodollar, if they don't use our dollar for oil, fuel, gas, etc., then we're not going to protect them. The problem, though, with that is that now there's an alternative, being BRICS, and BRICS is like, hey, come hang out with us. We'll protect you. We'll take care of you. And the Middle East was like, hell yeah, we'll sign up. And so that's why BRICS was growing in leaps and bounds and doubling in some years with its membership. So, all right, let me do a recap. That's what Lexus007 wants. There are 5 states who are going to have certain benefits completely cut off. Those are TANF, CCDF, and SSBG. Think like benefits for the elderly, disabled, young children, young parents, stuff like that, the fragile class. It's going to be about $10.26 billion withheld. Trump is demanding that basically the federal government go ahead, or that the states go ahead and hand over all their data so that the federal government can audit them, which, to be honest, is fair. It's how it should be. States are saying hell no, because they know there's fraud there. They know that this will end up with a lot of high-level Democrats being arrested. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, right, the Supreme Court is probably going to have to rule on it. Right now, it's in the district court in New York. New York gave 2 temporary restraining orders of 14 days each. I believe, I know one of them was, maybe the other one wasn't, but it doesn't matter. December 6th is officially the last day, which is tomorrow. So when all the offices shut down at the end of the day, at the very end of December 6th, officially, if they do not do a temporary restraining order, these benefits will be cut off for those states. The states, again, are California, Colorado, Illinois, Minnesota, and New York. There are certain states, we already did a video on it, where it's likely to happen to those states as well. But just to be clear, probably Virginia, probably Maine, etc. Some of the things that are coming out through those places. But obviously, we expect there to be really incredible levels of fraud in California. That's kind of the one where we are waiting to just count how bad it's actually going to be. All right, with that said, Attorney Walter Hnot, I'm going to be doing another video in about 15 minutes. Please remember to like and subscribe. Again, I don't have, just so you know, a huge background with Medicare. Medicare is not my jam. Social Security disability benefits are. So if you want Social Security disability benefits, or you want essentially an attorney to go ahead and work with you on your claim, you can always give me a call. America's Most Viewed, subscribe to and clicked on Disability Attorney. But for Medicare, I don't really do that stuff. They've gotten hundreds of my viewers, set up on Medicare. It's really great thing. I've heard amazing things. A lot of people have written to me. They're like, yeah, we really dig this company. This company did a great job. 339-226-6287, 339-226-6287. With that said, please remember that later tonight, I'm going to try and go live to answer questions for free. And then also keep in mind, the next video is about a topic that many of you are afraid of. So I'm just asking that if you have a weak stomach, that you not participate in the next video, because I am going to be telling you about things that I have learned while representing those who have been released from certain programs from the FBI, programs for different alphabet groups relating to individuals who were used throughout the United States. All right. I will catch you all a little bit later. I'll catch you soon at the next video, and we will rock and roll from there. Attorney Walter Hnot, thank you so much. And thank you so much, everybody that's viewing. Please be nice to each other. Catch you later. Bye-bye, everybody.